Right, we're going to get started here in just a moment. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to let a couple more people make their way. Got a jam-packed event today, so we definitely want to start right on time. If we could, moderator, if you could put up the first slide for me. All right, welcome to this month's EDGEinar, special Black History Month EDGEinar. My name is 𝗕𝗃 𝗏𝗂𝗏. I am the founder of EDGE and the CEO of Urban GIS. We're excited to have you today. We really appreciate you joining us. Let me know how I'm doing volume-wise. I was having a little bit of connection and audio issues, so feel free to throw something in the chat if you feel like you're not hearing me well. Hopefully I'm coming through just fine. We have an exciting event for you today, a lot of good information. We want to do something a little different this time. We want to start by, looking at the past and appreciating some of the milestones and places we've come from and getting that foundation of the great things that have been achieved by Black people in this country, America. And actually, I'm not in America right now. I'm in another city, which has an awesome and rich African history as well, Afro-Latino history. I'm in Cali, Colombia right now. Bienvenidos a todo de mi gente latina también. So today we're going to talk about the past, but then we're going to look at the future. And particularly as we've been focusing on STEM and how STEM is such a key part of moving forward the geospatial industry, as so many people like myself come from engineering or some other area of STEM and then get introduced to GIS, and where can we be going in the future? And we're going to talk about a really, really cool project that I'm really proud that we've had a chance to be a part of with United Negro College Fund. But let's start with some housekeeping items. We have a lot of things going on that I wanted to make sure that we didn't miss, and so we want to do it a little differently this time, kind of start with those things in the beginning. So let's talk a little bit more about EDGE and who we are. Welcome you to join our team here at EDGE, our community through LinkedIn, through our website, and get more information. So I'm going to be very brief here, but it's just edgegeospatial.com is our website, and EDGE is about really two main things: taking GIS and mapping and geospatial opportunities to the community, making them aware, hopefully getting the next generation to be inspired to do these sort of career paths, and even those who are already in careers to consider making GIS and geospatial their full-time career, or even a part of the toolkit that they can bring to whatever industries and services and markets that they're in. And then the other side is really trying to bring best practice, best diversity, equity, inclusion practice to the industry and help folks within the geospatial industry to understand why this is so important, why we all need to do our part, and we can all make a difference. And there's a huge benefit, return on investment when we do that. Next slide. So the four main pillars of EDGE are diversity recruiting. That's what most people think about, getting more diversity in the workforce. But it's also about business diversity and small businesses like mine, Urban GIS, working with other small businesses as well as larger companies partnering, and we all work to bring better services and value and products to the industry. Then there's community engagement, which is a big part of being able to get kids K through 12 exposure to GIS, the opportunities to know what's possible, and the opportunity for us as industry folks to do our part in preaching the GIS and geospatial gospel, if you will. And then lastly, DEI education and corporate, and I'd say organizational responsibility. So corporations, professional organizations, learning about DEI, learning how they can make their places more inclusive, where people feel like they belong, and their practices more equitable and culturally, ethnically, and all other sorts of diversity sensitive. Next slide. So we always want to thank our sponsors. Urban GIS, our EDGE is a 501c3 nonprofit foundation of Urban GIS, and really appreciate all of my staff and all that you all do to help EDGE be and have an impact here in the community and in the industry. Always want to shout out 𝗕𝗹𝗰𝗲. Can't thank them enough. Been a A1 partner, super supportive, always responsive, always willing to go the extra mile to help us do the things we do here at EDGE. And North Point Geographic Solutions have been with us from the very beginning. Small company, but big hearts, and really care about the things that we're doing here. 𝗏𝗏𝗃 as well, an awesome partner. So thank you to our corporate sponsors. And then I also like to thank our growing group of professional organizations. And if you're a part of a professional organization and you want to learn more about how you can partner with us, please, let's do it. We constantly are doing new things with our partners, making sure we can co-market, making sure we can support one another. We're here to also provide some level of counseling and ideas and concepts around DEI, as well as supporting, our common missions of helping new professionals and folks who are still trying to figure out their way to have better tools. And to that point, we had a great partnership with ESRI-YPN at the Federal GIS Conference. You can go to the next slide. And we want to thank them for really being a part of us having a great Fed GIS. So let's watch this video. We were part of the a resume workshop that was extremely well received. And you saw a picture there with our partners, 𝗕𝗹𝗰𝗲. And we always appreciate the chance to be at different conferences. And sometimes the partnership can be some of the professional organizations give us as a 501c3 a free pass to attend the conferences. And so we're all about collaboration here at EDGE. And so we'd love to talk to you more about doing that. If we can go to the next slide, please. So moving forward to some upcoming events that we have our March EDGEinar, which is all about celebrating Women's Month and the impact of women in GIS and talking about career advancement and some of these key things that are, I think, pertinent to all of us. But specifically, we're going to hear from some great ladies who have done amazing things in our industry. So please be there next. That'll be next month, Thursday, March 28th, same time. And then we just had the ESRI Federal Conference that I mentioned to you, where you just saw we just had the Federal Conference, and now this will be the Partner Conference coming up next month in March. On Monday, we're going to have a DEI networking event. This is really about business matchmaking, opportunities for all the partners to come together and see where we can find some synergies. And we really appreciate ESRI. They last year helped to co-sponsor this event. We look forward to working with them and some other partners to having an awesome event. So hope to see you there. You'll meet a lot of cool people and hopefully be able to develop some relationships and some project opportunities as a result. Next slide. And then we'll be in Atlanta, Georgia in March as well, from the 20th to the 24th for the 50th anniversary of the National Society of Black Engineers. This convention is a really big convention. Tons of engineers, IT folks, and some of the best and brightest in the country. And, also for companies and corporations that are looking for talent, people who could be a part of the GIS industry, maybe just don't know, but have a lot of prerequisite skills. I will be there. We'd love to talk to you about representation and figure out if we can work out some sponsorships where I could help to recruit for you or help to make students and other professionals aware of your organization, as well as to just attend various sessions to help you to know what's happening in the community of the National Society of Black Engineers as I try to bring more geospatial awareness to them. And then in April, we're really excited. Again, these partnerships are so huge. Can't thank AEG enough. They'll be flying me out to Hawaii. Cry for me. That's a really tough gig to take, to do these 3 sessions, very meaningful, impactful sessions. Hope to see some of you there. Love to meet with you there, and love for you to promote this for students to come out and check it out. So we have one that's becoming a Jedi Knight. They use that term a lot there, and they're really big at AEG on social justice, equity, diversity. The second one is all about cheat codes and how we can leverage networking. And that's what we're all about here at EDGE. And we're trying to help young people and new professionals know those trade secrets to further themselves, and particularly coming from a diverse perspective and diversifying your portfolio of networks. And then last but not least, from the least desired to multiple hires, how you can take a resume that may not have as much experience, or maybe some skills you might be lacking from a interview standpoint, how you can best position yourself and market yourself for your next position. So we're excited to partner to do these sort of events, and we look forward to seeing all of you all at these upcoming conferences. With that, we want to kind of move our program along and get to the heart of things. We can go to the next slide. So really, this month is about celebrating Black history. I look to celebrate Black history every month, and Black present time, and working towards the future. But I always have to take a moment to step back to look at the shoulders that folks like myself are able to stand on as a business owner, and as one of the first Black men to start a GIS consulting firm in this country. I have some awesome people to really revere and appreciate. 𝗵𝗵𝗶 𝗪𝗏 was always an inspiration for me as a young man coming up in the area of civil engineering. This individual, was so many different things, very multifaceted. So that's always inspiring to me. He was a naturalist. He was a mathematician. He also, wrote almanacs that were very popular. And then he was a surveyor. So he was a mapping professional. And of the highest order, he was a part of setting the bounds for our nation's capital, for Washington, D.C. And he helped to plan, and he's an urban planner, and helped to plan what D.C. would look like. He was an extremely influential individual and gave a lot of inspiration to people in his time. He was born from two parents who were slaves, so he really kind of was self-taught and learned a lot of these things on his own. And he was not only a geospatial professional, but he was also a social justice fighter. He was fighting for racial equity back then, at a time where, it wasn't always easy to do that, because you could lose your life. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of his memoirs. They were burned up the day of his funeral, probably for nefarious reasons, but we do still have a lot of his legacy. And his legacy, of course, lives on in being really literally putting our nation's capital on the map. So the next person we want to highlight is 𝗪𝗏 𝗪𝗏. I'm a Chicago native. So we owe so much to this individual. We don't know a lot about him. We know he had a Haitian background. So first of all, to navigate and come from Haiti, and to be the first known person outside of the indigenous folks who were living in the Chicago area, but the first person to settle in Chicago. So what we know about that, you have to be a navigator, you have to be a mapping professional to be a fur trader, and you have to be able to know your way around. This is pre-GPS, this is pre a lot of the tools that we had. So he was probably one of the first people to create maps and areas of Chicago that others could come behind. And we have these sort of photos that see he, was a developer. He created his land, and he was very smart, and he was very geospatially savvy. He put his house right in the heart of Chicago, land that's worth a lot of money, because it was at the confluence of the lake and the river. And a lot of people don't know this, but Chicago was extremely critical in this nation becoming the wealthy and world leader that it's become as far as America and our commerce. Chicago was the hub in the 1800s, and before the railroad really built up. Of course, Chicago became a railroad hub, but everybody was navigating through water. And so coming through the Mississippi, and then through some of the rivers in Illinois, and then ultimately when the I&M Canal was built, changed the game. It changed the game for commerce and for shipping, and made America a huge success. And Chicago was right at the heart of that. And this gentleman, saw all of that and really helped to not only build that sort of backdrop for business, but in the spirit of EDGE, he was also a person who could navigate with different people from different cultures. And so he was able to interact with the native folks there, and then make it easy for others to come behind him and do the same. So we want to shout him out, and he literally put Chicago on the map. So we're going to go to the next slide. And SNCC, a very, very prominent social justice and civil rights organization that many of us have heard of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and these sort of folks. But what you didn't hear about is that they were creating maps. They were using maps to think about things logistically, to plan. And, that's the cool thing about our industry. It is relevant to all walks of life, to all sorts of organizations, to all sorts of professions. So even if people don't decide to become GIS professionals, these tools are very vital. And so that's why we have to fight that much more, that we have diversity within our industry so that everyone can benefit and everyone can bring the value that they have. And coming back to Chicago, we've had some recent projects where, again, people are using maps and GIS to help us to analyze where we are with ethnicity and diversity and equity and all these sort of questions. And it's really cool that a wide range of people can become interested in GIS because they want to have the social impact, because they want to do things from an empirical standpoint, and because visualization matters and where matters. So a lot of great history, and I'm all about trying to make new history and take the present time that we're in to a better place and help people to understand why this is relevant, despite what a lot of people are putting out there and a lot of false information. And there's some people who don't always have the best interest for the masses in mind and use the name of DEI for the wrong reasons. But there are many of us and most of us who are trying to push this forward and understand how important it is and how critical it is, as we can see from our history, for us to do it with excellence. So with that, we're going to go to our panel now and talk about a really cool project. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to let these ladies kind of introduce themselves and give their background. But we have some awesome panelists. Both of them are PhDs. So we've got two doctors in the house, Dr. Natasha McClendon and Dr. Victoria Price. One that presides in Atlanta, Georgia, and the other one that is from the UK, but has spent some time in the US. So welcome, ladies.
Hi, Keith.
Hi there. Glad to have you aboard. Natasha, you okay? You doing well? We got your audio going? Looks like not quite. I think I can kind of hear you now, Natasha. Okay, and let us know in the chat if you guys are having any problems with the audio, if we need to talk up or anything like that. But thank you for joining us, and excited to talk about the UNCF project that Urban GIS and EDGE have partnered with UNCF to, I think, do something very, very meaningful. But before we go into that, Natasha, would you like to just share a little bit about your background? We can go to the next slide, please. And you've won some awards. I met you a year and a half ago at the ESRI conference, and just in this short amount of time, I think it was a year and a half ago, it's hard to even tell, but you have become an advocate of GIS and are taking all the great things you've been doing at UNCF and now adding the spatial component. So we're glad to have you aboard. Share a little bit about yourself and your background and kind of how you got into all of this. Uh-oh. I don't think we're hearing you, Natasha. I'm not on my end. Not sure. Maybe we'll give you a moment to work through that. Let's go to Victoria, and then we'll come right back to you, Natasha. So Victoria, really cool meeting you. And this is where these relationships with the professional organizations come in handy. We were at a special kind of diversity luncheon, I want to say, at the end of last year's AAG convention. We happened to sit next to one another, began talking, and this is where it's really cool. People from different countries still have the same interests. And although we have different backgrounds, we both have the geography and GIS. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what your PhD work was around and kind of your background professionally and otherwise.
Sure. Thanks, Keith, for the introduction and for the wonderful presentation. So I'm a geographer and statistician by background, but my career so far has been in research, particularly small business research and labor and regional economics. So this summer, I graduated from my PhD, which was focused on supporting growth and success for women-owned businesses, home-based businesses, and businesses in underserved communities more generally. But I've also conducted research into how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted different groups, including minority business owners, self-employed women, women with children, etc. So as Keith mentioned, yeah, I studied and worked in the University of St Andrews in Scotland, the University of Southampton in England, and I do have some public policy experience and a lot of interest in public policy through the University of Cambridge and their excellent Centre for Science and Policy. In general, I would say I've always been passionate about knowledge exchange and facilitating partnerships between academic organisations and academic researchers, and then policymakers, the private sector, and the non-profits, because they are essentially the people, anybody that can, utilise the research we do in academia to make a positive difference to people and communities. So yeah, I was delighted to be connected to you, Keith, and to EDGE last year through the AAG. To be honest with you, it almost felt like fate that there was this charity doing great work to support underrepresented minority small business owners, professionals and job seekers in geospatial science, because essentially combines several of my most significant interests: geography, small business owners, and building support networks for underrepresented groups. So but a wonderful experience collaborating over the last few months with EDGE and with UNCF.
Absolutely. It's been a joy to have you on board, and we're looking forward to working with you on more projects. Maybe can you share for the audience a little bit of background while we're waiting for Natasha to join us again about the project and kind of what the UNCF project was all about, and then maybe lead towards your specific portion of the work you were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course, Natasha will be able to speak more to the wider project, but so we've been conducting a data gap analysis on the topic of students of colour in engineering. And there are several specific research questions that the UNCF and their partners have been looking at, which sort of revolve around the barriers and challenges faced by students of colour in engineering education, the support systems they have or don't have. And so essentially what the data gap is what data is available for understanding those problems, issues, barriers, support networks, and what data is not available. And within my specific role within that project has been to do a review of current research and evidence, and what data sources and types of data are being used within the current evidence base, which has been really fascinating and introduced me to a topic that I didn't know much about beforehand, but I now feel like I wouldn't say an expert on, but something that I've really gone in depth with this and got to read the research of fantastic scholars doing really great work in this area. So happy to talk about that. And yeah, I think Natasha probably can hopefully give us a little bit more background into the wider reach of this very important project that we're all working on.
Awesome. Well, I think it couldn't have timed up better. Natasha, is your volume going back? Is it back online or?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Yes, it is. So Victoria shared a little bit about her background and also about the data gap analysis portion. Maybe you could start with your background and kind of how you got into this work, what geospatial has kind of meant to you, and then segue that right into the broader UNCF project around, we know it's STEM is one part, but you can maybe talk about it more broadly and outside of the data gap analysis.
So my background is in psychology, sociology, and my PhD is in educational policy studies. So I see those as being linked by understanding from undergrad what the psychology or how people think on an individual level, and then sociology helping me to understand how people think in larger societal contexts, and then educational policy studies as a way to understand how that impacts both of those, the individual and societal conditions impact education for students, especially Black students in my role at UNCF and in past research, STEM, students of color pursuing STEM. And so one of the things that we focused on in this project in this collaborative project was how we support students of color who are pursuing 3 pathways and they are medicine, law, and engineering. And we partner with UrbanGIS to try to figure out how would we even tell that story about engineering, because it's so broad. And I met Keith along with some other folks like Clinton about 1.5 years ago at ESRI conference. And so we had this conversation about like, well, what is, GIS and how many people use it and for how many different uses it has. It seemed like a great entry point to think about and a great sector to of engineering to partner with to better understand what are the challenges that students of color are facing as they pursue education and career pathways in engineering.
You're doing amazing work, and now that you're finding the intersectionality with GIS and the work that you're doing, maybe talk to me about some of those ways that utilizing these tools is making a difference, and why do you think organizations like UNCF, as well as HBCU students and a lot of the people in your ecosphere, could benefit but with more exposure to GIS and geospatial tools?
I think attending the conference, especially the education arm the first time, really opened up for me what GIS could do. I think on the technical level, it is in a lot of our apps. If we're using Uber or Lyft, that's part of it. If we're using any kind of mapping capabilities in our phones for directions, that's part of that. And so many other uses beyond that. But once I started to understand that, I also saw, I think going back to sociological influences, to me, it is also a tool that can be used for socio-political research. So when I think of W.E.B. Du Bois and his mapping of Black culture and neighborhoods, community in his work in Philadelphia, or thinking about Black folks who created resources like the Green Book, that is a mapping. And so I think taking that historical tradition and thinking about how can we use that in work and education to better understand what challenges students are facing in this project, but in other projects as well. How can we better understand how to use this tool to then also tell the story? So learning about different tools, 𝗧𝗵𝗲, story mapping, and then the more sophisticated mapping that you and your company do that we had to partner with you for, because I haven't learned that yet. But I think getting a sense of how many ways this can be used and what impact it can have, and how it can better communicate some of our findings around education that are so important for people to use and understand to advocate for students. It seemed like a no-brainer that we want to be more familiar with this software, the tools. And I think in working with you and us having similar visions about how we want to try to impact these students in their exposure to different trajectories and abilities to pursue their own dreams and pathways, that this is one avenue that can help us do that in many different ways.
Well said. Well said. I totally agree with that. Let's bring Victoria back in. This is going to be a question I'll ask both of you, but let's start with Victoria. Victoria, if you could talk a little bit more about your data, your literature review within the data gap analysis. And a part of why this project was happening is because we know some people have done studies around what are the reasons why we're not able to get as many people of color and as much diversity in majors like engineering and computer science, and why we're not able to have the matriculation and the continuation into the professional level. Can you talk a little bit more about what you found from what has been done in the past, and maybe where there's some opportunities to do more research in this work so that we can make spatially and just in general more informed decisions on programs and means to get more diversity within the engineering and STEM realms?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just maybe leading on from what Natasha was discussing in relation to mapping and GIS, one of the most prominent findings from our literature review was that, well, we didn't find any studies that used GIS or really did any kind of locational analysis to look at how location, whether that be at state level, whether that be within cities, whether that be students from certain neighborhoods, and how that locational aspect might impact whether a student goes into engineering, and then whether or not they then succeed once they're in an engineering course. So there is a huge gap there for mapping and using GIS to actually study this topic further. I would say also one of the things that we identified was that there is a lack of publicly available data on this topic as well that's able to capture what we need and the groups of students that we want to capture in their progression and their pathways. And to some extent that will be because there are certainly going to be nuances, like people have individual paths and many different routes into engineering. And so collecting publicly available, wide, national, large sample data sets on this topic will be challenging. But currently there's very little available outside of just the census data, which is quite limiting. And so I certainly think that it's not just going to be about the research that needs to be done, but it's going to be about making sure that the data is available for people to go ahead and do that research and to bring location and to bring GIS into it. And then I guess more broadly, I would say there's a lot of great information out there, and there was a lot of studies about the provider aspect of programs that support students going through engineering. So that might be boot camps, summer schools, outreach programs, leadership programs, mentoring programs. And so that could include K-12 as well, and like actually getting into schools and providing programs that help raise awareness for students who might not otherwise understand what engineers do and therefore may not select engineering as an option. And many of these studies that have assessed the success of these types of programs have sort of show that they are overwhelmingly positive. But there is definitely an issue that we identified whereby these programs are funded by short-term grants, 5-6-year grants, the National Science Foundation, etc. There's many organizations out there that are providing funding for these. Then they're very successful, and then the funding ends. And so what happens after the funding end? We have this wonderful program that there's data, qualitative, quantitative data that is showing that these programs are really helping students. And yet there's no national or wide scale grant that is helping support the same program in multiple universities. So they tend to be quite separated from each other. And then there's a lack of perhaps consistency as well. So I would say, thinking about those kind of two avenues, the provider programs that are supporting students and the grants available, that would be one area, I think, for trying to do more joined up research, and the GIS side of things were two big findings that we got from the study.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. And Natasha, you are the recipient of our work. Love for you to share about, some key things that you were able to get from it, as well as the things you all were looking into on the UNCF side. And then maybe you can also introduce where HBCUs, Latin serving institutions, Hispanic serving institutions, and the Native colleges, how that plays into these sort of challenges that we have in getting more diversity in fields like engineering and computer science.
So I think building off of what Victoria was saying about the lack of spatial data, I think some of the questions that we had were around how do we come to understand more about where students who end up in engineering pathways come from? Like, what communities are they coming from? What high schools might they be coming from? And what high schools send students to what colleges? Thinking about what level of exposure they have in certain communities, and how do the program locations and resource locations match up with that? I think also thinking about if certain colleges that already have great programs that are embedded in place are actually institutions that those students are aware of that really want to pursue engineering but don't know what school would be the best school, what school has the most resources. How do we make those connections so that students know where is going to be the best place for them to go? And I think to Keith's question about the HSIs, the Indigenous Tribal Colleges, or 𝗵𝗄𝗄s for Asian American Pacific Islander students, and HBCUs, certain schools are really good at certain things. So there are certain institutions that we want students to know, like this one in this space is really great for students who want to pursue this type of engineering. And or this institution is really supportive, has really great numbers in getting Latinx students out or tribal students out who are really tied to the specific study of like environmental justice. Whereas some other students may be interested in a different type of engineering. So we really wanted to start to dig at that. And I think this was the first level of us understanding not that those are great questions, but the data doesn't exist. And I think sometimes we have assumptions. Now, of course, that data exists. Why wouldn't it? But we couldn't even say, students who are at this school came from this neighborhood or state, because that's just something that's not really reported. And I think receiving the work from Urban GIS helps us to present it to the funder and say, this seems like something that would already be available, but it's just not. So how can we think about the choices we make to support students differently, knowing that that's something that we don't know? Is there a way that we can research or bring them on UrbanGIS to do research, help us do research to find that data, collect that data, and maybe even, pilot things that show us the importance of that data. But if we didn't have the gap analysis really highlighting some of these findings, we wouldn't be able to advocate in that way.
Yeah, you touched on so many great points. And I think one of the common things that comes up that we try to do here at EDGE is about collaboration, because sometimes some of these data sets may exist at one university, but there's no national data set, right? And sometimes there's pieces and places. And what we try to do here is inspire thought leadership and us being thoughtful and intentional around DEI, around trying to promote diversity. And it sounds like there's some room on the university level, with some of the corporations, the professional organizations, to come together to collaborate to A, collect more information, B, as you alluded to, Victoria, kind of find those places to advocate and make sure the programs align. And as you kind of talked about, Natasha, matching where the constituencies are with where the need is, with how they can connect with the universities. I think these are all doable things, but I think we have to figure out how we can work together and do more information sharing. To that point, can we talk about the intersectionality of the same challenges that exist within engineering exist in fields like GIS and geospatial, the lack of awareness, and how the two fields can intertwine pretty well, where you might have students who are interested in computer science or engineering. They fit a lot of the same constituencies in terms of their abilities and capabilities, but also in terms of some of the challenges of rigorous course loads, having to go through a lot of mathematics, some of the things that the challenged school systems don't seem to do as well as, and therefore disenfranchise, or folks from different communities may not have the same opportunities. So maybe you all talk about those. What are those challenges, and how can we mutually meet those in these two different industries, GIS, IT, and engineering? Whoever wants to jump in on that.
I guess I would say that I'm not as well versed as you or Victoria probably in what are the specific challenges of navigating GIS and engineering. As my perspective is not personal, but I have been working with STEM students for about 10 years. And I think in general, a lot of the challenges are what we might expect, which is that one of the number one variables that we look at that's a predictor of success is your parent an engineer? Or do you know somebody that's an engineer closely that can mentor you through the process? Because as with all pathways, it's like you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what questions to ask. You don't know what tests you need. You don't know what certifications are most important until somebody helps you navigate that. And so I think that's always one of the biggest challenges for all of the students that we're studying, for them to, if they don't have that already in place, how can they connect with folks who can step into that gap for them? Because that helps them to understand everything that will come after. And I think, as you said, on the engineering side, it's coming much faster than the other pathways that we study, law and medicine. Because as an undergrad, which means really in high school, possibly middle school, you have to know what type of courses you need to be taking, what trajectory you need to be on, what summer camps you might need to be going to, what bridge programs you might take advantage of. And all of those things have big implications for your success. So I think that's always the overarching challenge that I see across the board for STEM students, and specifically students pursuing engineering and computer science. And some of the programs that I worked on have focused on how can we support students, not just in that way of technical mentorship, but also how do we help students to navigate being mindful of their mental health, like as they're navigating these highly stressful pathways. How do we put people in their path that they can just talk about what it is like for them to experience it, and what kind of tools they can use to ground themselves and develop a foundation for themselves where they won't feel lost, that they lost a part of themselves or lost their trajectory, like their successful trajectory down that pathway.
Victoria?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Natasha's covered loads of brilliant things there. I'm thinking about what I can add. I guess that we tried to sort of divide up when we were thinking about the determinants of success in engineering, and I think many of the same issues are going to exist for geospatial professionals and also medicine and law. So I think there's several that will be across the board. But we kind of divided it up into things that were kind of within the student themselves, and then the institution and how that can then impact someone's success and their trajectory through their education path, and then these additional providers and the programs that we've been discussing today. So I think one of the things you were alluding to there, Keith, was the importance of mathematics within engineering, and this definitely applies to GIS and geospatial science as well, and that can include calculus in particular. So we came across several programs that were specifically designed to assist students, summer schools, boot camps, etc., to help students fill in the gaps in their mathematical knowledge that might prevent them from being able to succeed in their courses. And it is worth keeping in mind that not all public schools provide calculus. So if you have gone to and for that matter, I know less about private education in the US, but there may be private schools that don't focus on calculus. But let's just sticking with the public school perspective for now. If your school doesn't provide that, and you don't have the option to get that training anywhere else, you will struggle in an engineering course. Or it goes back to the perception and the awareness aspect as well. If you have not done physics in your high school education, you're hardly going to apply for college to become a physicist. You may not even know what careers are available to you. And there was one really interesting study that we found on middle school students, and it's a draw an engineer test. So, these have been used a lot also in reference to the gender aspect and the kind of intersectional aspect between students of color and women of color and who you perceive as being an engineer. But actually what was interesting as well is what they draw the engineer doing. And many of these middle school students essentially thought engineers were working in construction. They were always working with machines, that they were people that fixed things. And I'm not saying that any of those things aren't true, not at all, but there is a huge, and this project has made me realize there is a huge variety of engineering options out there that students just simply don't know. And if students are also driven by, say, a desire to go into a career that's going to be financially prosperous for them in the long run, if they don't understand that there's this range of options available, and they don't understand that there's also a range of really careers that will be very financially prosperous, they may also not be motivated. They may pursue something else. So I think that's important. But the other thing that I would like to highlight that came up again and again that I wasn't really expecting in our research was self-efficacy. So just self-belief, the belief that you have the abilities to achieve what you want to achieve in engineering and to be successful. And that's all tied in that's all tied in with these ideas of identities and overlapping identities. And it produced some really interesting results. There was one study that focused on a particular student who talked about his overlapping identities of being a Black man and being a computer engineer. And those two things were not mutually exclusive. He considered himself to be a Black engineer. And it was that identity as a Black engineer that had led him to be interested in more social justice orientated engineering work, which is really key and it's kind of maybe the final point I could make here, is really key when we're thinking about basically the positive impacts and how engineering can help with social justice related issues. So that you kind of have this circular effect. We're trying to increase the diversity of STEM, of engineering, geospatial careers, and then we're also trying to take those career paths and help them to do good in the world and to do more impact-orientated work.
No, very well said. There's such a synergy between the social justice and equity side and the DEI side. And as a person who went to the top civil engineering school in the country, possibly in the world, University of Illinois, just being able to, on the DEI side, feel like you were included, to your point, Natasha, that you belonged, and you're definitely a minority within these programs. And then to your point, Victoria, the key part of just both of you, staying mentally healthy, being able to feel like you're supported, having the right resources, having peer groups who can kind of just keep you in there, because you usually are students who come from backgrounds where they were successful academically, and now all of a sudden you're in these challenging majors and programs, and 5 levels of calculus, and you might have competed in math in high school, but now you hate math in college because you're getting taught by TAs who barely speak English, and it's just a whole different world. And so it's very discouraging and disheartening, especially as a person of color. So the programs to prepare students, to your point, Natasha, the ability to see it in order to be it, and to have some mentorship for people to prepare you for these things, to anchor you through these things, to help you to navigate. I had a cousin who graduated from MIT in civil engineering ahead of me, still doing great things now, and that inspired me. But I had those kind of North Stars to help me through. So we appreciate organizations that are doing this in the geospatial realm, and we know organizations like NSBE have been doing it for a long time in engineering, and I'm hoping we can bring all of these sort of folks together, because we have the common thread. We're trying to get the same talent pool, but I think the difference with geospatial is we don't get the same level of exposure and light that engineering, that law and medicine gets, which even still that's undersaturated. To your point, a lot of people don't have an idea of what's entailed, but yet they're using the tools every day on their phone. Yet they're, would be super excited to have a job where they can go out in the field and map things and go to cool places, and possibly, to the point that was made, not even necessarily have to go through the traditional 4-year or rigorous sort of engineering or classic STEM pathway. So let's talk about that. What are some of these other areas, like boot camps? You mentioned a different type of boot camp, but what about programming boot camps, or getting this experience through the military, or become a geospatial or engineering professional coming through junior college? Can either of you pour into what the possibility of diversifying our industry and giving people a pathway through some non-conventional measures might look like? Whomever wants to go first.
I think we're in a pattern of Natasha and then me, which okay. I like. So Natasha, please go ahead.
You're speaking, Keith, is, and this was a finding as well, I think, is how integral HSIs, HBCUs, ANAPZs, and tribal colleges are to contributing to these pipelines. And I think, to your point about, and I will, I guess, flip this a little bit, like, are people speaking your language? I found that to be in doing focus groups with students, how professors are communicating complex concepts to students in a way that is accessible to them, that they understand and can apply. And I think sometimes we see in the hard sciences that folks are very reticent to do that, because they think you just need to gather it, you figure it out, right? And there are ways that they can make very complex concepts accessible by relating to what students know, are familiar with, and understand. And 𝗃𝗃𝗃, as an example, they have a really strong STEM program preparing their students for pathways in like engineering. And one of the professors was teaching organic chemistry along with some other courses, but that's known to be a really hard course, right? And so the student said, the difference between this and other folks that I've tried to take really hard courses with is that he made it accessible to me. A lot of the professors think, I'm going to make it hard, I'm going to leave it hard, I'm not going to try to break it down in any way. And the other professor thought, what building blocks of this concept can I use to help the student understand? Because we all win when the student understands and can be successful. We don't win when students are weeded out, because disproportionately, that's going to leave us with less diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And so I think that is just has been shown to be just as important through the literature. And I'll stop there, so I don't want to talk too much.
Go ahead, Victoria.
Yeah, I think two things I'll just add, maybe three. So the military route is a really interesting one, because one of the great things about doing this project was that we were bringing together all different types of data. So we had the qualitative data, which I just described, from like individual stories and identities, the quantitative data. And then we also had, Keith's experience as an engineer that we could draw on when we were thinking about how to frame the problem. And I will say, Keith, you brought up the mention of alternative routes into engineering. And when I was looking at the literature review, there was very little mention of military routes into careers in engineering. And so I would say, if anybody's looking to do research, that would be an area alongside the GIS work that we've been doing, where there's just very little in the evidence base there. The other really important institution for taking alternative paths, not just the classic 4-year degrees, transfer students from community colleges. So that's something that came up in the literature multiple times, and there has been a little bit more work done into that. But the importance of transfer colleges preparing people to then move into 4-year degrees, I think that was something that was highlighted. And then, the final thing I'll say is I completely agree with Natasha about the importance of HBCUs and other minority serving institutions for supporting students. So I read, there's a report from the Department of Education from September 2023 that I read the other day that said, despite representing only 3% of colleges and universities, HBCUs produce 40% of Black engineers. And I think that actually links very nicely to EDGE and diversity hiring, because if you're looking to try to increase the diversity of your workforce and all of the benefits that we know that brings, and you're not hiring out of HBCUs, you have an incredible untapped resource of engineers. And actually, I think the numbers were even higher for medicine as well, like doctors, because I know this has been the other part of the project. Yeah, I have the number here. So in the same report, it says 70% of all Black doctors and dentists come out of HBCUs. And this is data from 2023 from the Department of Education. So if you're not hiring directly out of these schools, trying to get your vacancies to these schools and working with them, then you have a huge untapped resource that you're not utilizing that you really should be.
Really great points. And one of the things we love about EDGE is folks like yourself who don't come from an HBCU, you come from UK, you have a totally different background, but you can relate, you understand, and these are challenges we're all trying to work through together and provide opportunities and solutions. And so that's a wonderful thing. I was torn today. I was going to, even though I didn't go to HBCU, I almost went to FAMU, but I couldn't pass up an academic scholarship. And this is a key part, money and being able to go to these great schools that are expensive sometimes. That was the ultimate decision for me to go to University of Illinois. I had a full academic scholarship, but I was on my way to FAMU. So I was going to wear my HBCU just kind of shirt here to support this month in particular. But I decided to go with my Virgil White, another engineer who's, we're very diverse in our backgrounds. He ended up making his mark in fashion, but he was at the Illinois Institute of Technology. And I think that's part of the challenge we talked about, Natasha, is that we have to make it relatable, because culturally we might be wired differently than people from other ethnicities, from people from, maybe people from Asia might be, their culture is aligned a little bit more with the kind of engineering program and the way the academics work. And maybe some Caucasian folks might be able to relate better, but some people from African descent or Latin descent or Native descent might not, have the wherewithal to kind of fit in culturally or feel like they're included in these environments. Or we're now hearing about the testing kind of being different, and people are finally recognizing there's some ethnic biases that are in these tests, and these tests are a big part of what will determine if students can qualify for a lot of these schools. So we have to continue to look at alternative approaches to get exposure. And to that point, what do you all think about the synergies with some of the professional organizations like National Society of Black Engineers, who get that part very well, but I think there's not as much integration with GIS and geospatial And what about tapping into the boot camps or finding talent through some of those sort of places? And maybe for some students who don't want to do four-year institutions could go to boot camps, can learn how to be field data collectors, can find some other ways and make this industry relatable and have a great career, but maybe not have the same pathway as someone else, but still have the impact ultimately. Any thoughts on that?
Some of the comments in the chat are referring to some of the what we were calling like non-linear pathways in the study. And so lifting up veteran experiences working in local state government. But I think the other thing, to your point about Virgil Abloh, a lot of students have varying interests. And so their interests converge around a couple of things. But I think one of the challenges and maybe in some ways lack of creative thinking in the engineering space, in the traditional engineering space, is not seeing those other things as related to engineering. So as someone who picked up sewing as a hobby, one of my interests has been, it has lots of elements of STEM focus, like curriculum. So spatial awareness, logical reasoning, thinking about something from a 2D to a 3D, all these skills that you would need to be in challenging pathways like engineering, right? And thinking about not how do you manipulate things with chemistry to make things easier to construct, what resources do you need to make sure that things stay together and are strong enough? A lot of these things are about STEM, the things you learn in STEM fields, but fashion is seen as something that is, you know, not important, something that's like materialistic and kind of like vapid, when it has a lot of uses. Like if you're talking about Carhartt wear for like heavy duty work, there is science in that fashion. And people are wearing it as fashion, even though they're not working in construction places right now. That's a current trend. But I think thinking about how we think about people's other interests and them being integrated into the pathway instead of them being ostracized for having those varying interests could help with how we diversify the field.
I love that. And as a dad of a son who's a fashion designer, with Virgil being his idol, he went to Purdue engineering camps and all those things, but fashion is where he is. But he wants to be innovative in his fashion. He wants to find new ways to design things and learn things through 3D and virtual tools. And so that, you know, to your point, I think this is where diversity can bring in new approaches, better products, and just amazing untapped resources that we haven't gotten into. We're coming close on time. I'd love for you both to maybe finish off with any key thoughts that you wanted to leave that you maybe didn't touch on previously. Victoria, we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. Well, I kind of want to finish with, so one of the papers that I read at the start of the abstract said, and I think this fits in perfectly with what you and Natasha have just been discussing, said diversity is a cornerstone to innovation in engineering problem solving. And I think that is what I learned more than anything else from this project that we've been working on. Absolutely, there's, you know, many of the studies I've looked at have been highlighting the benefits of having diversity within engineering. And I hope that's something that we can move towards more of as a society to help both to elevate underrepresented minorities, but I think there's also wider societal, important societal impacts. I mean, we need more engineers, we need more people with STEM skills. And when we're not seeing minority students going into these careers, we all lose out as a result of that. Absolutely. And yeah, I think the only other thing I really wanted to mention, if there is anybody out that's listening that would like, you know, wants to be pointed towards any of these studies that I've discussed today, because I have been talking about the wonderful work of others, like if they want an access to the evidence base or just some pointers as to where to go for this kind of research, it's really interesting. There's a lot out there. They're very welcome to get in touch, and I can certainly help with that.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. Natasha, any last words?
So I'm happy that we were able to collaborate. And I think, to the point that Victoria was speaking about DEI is that with more students with diverse experiences and perspectives in the field, you get more diversity in how people digest and analyze a problem and create solutions, right? And so I think it's not just that we need more students in that pathway, it's that in order for engineering to continue to exceed and excel the expectations of what is already done, you need diverse perspectives. And so that's ultimately part of the impact that we're really trying to center here and use this analysis to lift that up.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure in the chat as well as on our EDGE website, if folks want to get in touch with you all, learn more about the study. We'd love to partner and to further this study. I mean, we covered a lot of ground, but there's a lot more to look at, and we'd love to do something similar for the geospatial industry. So let's find some partnerships. Let's find some funding. Let's find a way to make some impact. So we thank you all for joining us. As always, you can join us on our EDGE website, 𝗕𝗃𝗄𝐻.com. Please feel free to let people know they can check out this EDGEinar on our YouTube. Again, EDGE Geospatial, join our LinkedIn. Just be a part of this community. Let's keep having conversations. Let's keep sharing success stories. Let's keep encouraging. And we're always looking to partner. So we really appreciate both of you all. And hey, go ladies, go GIS, go Black History. Let's just work together and make some magic happen. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.